All right, thanks, Bethany. Thanks everyone for joining us today. It's exciting to have you here. ACA process for 2022 is what we're here to talk about. Everybody's always excited for these year-end webinars to talk about tax and form processing. So let's get started. By way of introductions, my name is Mike Zernheld. For those of you who don't know me, haven't talked to me before, I am the HCM consulting manager here at Bergen KDV. I have been here for about 3.5 years, and I spend most of my time working with our clients like you on the system and how to just take better advantage of it. So I'm excited to be here to talk about ACA with Sarah today. Sarah, do you want to give a little introduction for yourself?
Yep. So for anybody who hasn't talked to me before, I am Sarah Schul. I'm what we call an HRIS designer. So you've probably worked with me in implementations or on support questions. I've been here for around about 4 years at this point, kind of all over in the department. And right now I'm in HRIS. So I am here to help as much as I can.
Awesome. All right, so today we're going to talk a little bit about ACA requirements and deadlines and the Bergen printing process for filing. We're going to talk about how to audit your information in the system, what sorts of things you should look at, as well as reports that can help you. We're going to walk through the process that you'll need to do to complete the forms, and then we'll have some time at the end for Q&A. There's also a slide in here on some additional resources, as Bethany mentioned at the end. You will get copies of all of these slides, so that resource slide will be coming to you as part of it. We're going to start by just talking through some of these processes, and then we'll switch over to a demo in the system to show you some of these reports and some of the processes as well, part of the way through the presentation. All right, so getting started, ACA, who needs to do it? So most of you, since you're here, I'm going to assume that you know enough about ACA to know that you need to file it, but just in case anybody is not aware or this is their first year on the platform, ACA is a healthcare reporting initiative, part of the Affordable Care Act. That's what ACA stands for. The reporting requirements apply to employers with more than 50 full-time employees in the prior calendar year. So smaller employers generally do not have to file this unless they are part of a larger group, what's referred to as an ALE, aggregate large employers. So if there are a number of smaller businesses that are co-owned, you may collectively cross that threshold. So that's the determination there. Also, self-insured companies do always need to report. What are the timelines and what are the reports that we're talking about? So there are two main filings that are part of ACA. One is the 1095, which is a report, a form that is due out to your employees, and the 1094, which is a summary report, which is due back to the IRS. I said earlier today to someone else, for those of you who've been a long time in payroll, the 1095 is like your W-2, and the 1094 is like your W-3. The timeline for this process that we're going to talk about is we want you to have all of your forms reviewed inside of the platform by the end of January. Some of this you can do a little bit ahead of time. You can do some of the auditing ahead of time. Most of this process you will need to wait until after the first of the year to be able to do in the system, because you have to have all of your data in for December to be able to complete the process. But we do ask to have everything done by the end of January, and then notify Bergen KDV via an email to the payroll support board when you are finished, and we can move on to the process. Why do we set that deadline? We want to start printing the 1095s for your employees in February. They need to be postmarked by March 2nd of 2023, and they'll be distributed to you in the same process that we use for live checks or W-2s, which for most of you is going to be a bulk shipment to your primary location. We also need to file your returns with the IRS. The return to the IRS is actually due after the forms to the employees. It's not due until the end of March, but we want to have the whole process completed and time to deal with any errors that come up on the IRS filing beforehand so that we don't have any surprises in mid-March. We want to sail through easy to the end of the year. All right, so what do we need you to look at? And again, a little later in the presentation, we're going to jump into a demo company and I'll show you some of these things, but I just kind of want to talk through what sorts of things you need to look for in your ACA audit. So the first one is you're going to need to verify the contact information on the form. The 1094 form and the 1095 have a specific employer contact on them. They have a name and a phone number as well as an address. If you have been using the system for a long time and you haven't had a lot of staffing changes, that's probably been the same person for a number of years, but it does need to be a current employee. So we'll have you verify that. The main thing we're going to have you look at though is employee information. Most of the issues that clients come up with in terms of ACA reporting is related to inaccurate or missing benefit profiles or ACA profiles. If you clean up those things beforehand, that will eliminate the vast majority of issues that we see after the fact when people are trying to create the forms. There are a couple of different reports that we're going to show you. One is called the ACA Compliance Alert Report, and one is called the Code Review Report, that are designed specifically to help you fill that out and review that information. Also, if you are self-insured, you have to have dependents listed on the employee's 1095. If you are doing the benefit enrollment in KPay, you've got all of those already, but if you're doing that somewhere else, you may need to load that. Again, that only applies to self-insured insurance setups. All right, let's talk about a couple of these reports specifically. So the first one is the ACA Compliance Alert Report. Some of you may get this automated on a quarterly or monthly basis to your email. And what this does is it just shows you employees who need to be reviewed because there's something going on with them that could cause you issues down the road. There are instructions on the slide on how to do it, on how to review them. I'll show you that live here in just a minute, but again, the main issue you're going to run into is employees who are missing benefit profiles, because the benefit profile tells the system what benefits the employee is eligible for and when. And so without that, the ACA calculator can't figure out when they were offered coverage and what type of coverage and if it was affordable. So the compliance alert is primarily going to show you people who are missing information. If you discover that a benefit or an ACA profile is missing, we also want to include some information just on how to look at them. So in this example, you've got an employee who changes from being eligible to coverage to ineligible. So you've got a row here where it says benefit enrollment, and it's got that default effective date of 12/31/1900 that you would have put in as a new hire. And then they've inserted a blank row. Now, your setup may be different. Some of our clients have a benefit profile called not eligible or not active that you may be using. Others only have one profile for people who are eligible, and so they're going to use the blank row to indicate that someone has switched to a non-eligible classification. So adjust, depending on your particular setup. Similarly, if you discover that an ACA profile is missing, you'll have multiple rows here as employees move from full-time to part-time or eligible to ineligible. The specific profiles that you have are going to vary depending on your business needs. Most companies are going to have a profile for salaried employees, a profile for variable employees. You may have some part-time profiles. You may have a non-employee profile. Again, it's going to be a little bit different for each of you, but do make sure that these rows and these dates are aligned. One of the key pieces on the ACA profile, and we've underlined it here and gave an example over here, is when someone changes mid-year, you're going to want those profiles effective dated on the first of the month. The 1095 that we file for each employee shows whether they were offered or covered for every month of the calendar year. So the reporting is a lot cleaner if you set the profile on the first of the month. Now, if an employee moves in the middle of the month, because most of the time they probably do, you're going to need to decide what your process is for choosing whether it's going to go forwards or backwards. The IRS, in terms of how they want it reported, is not specific. It's really up to the employer to decide their best practice. In general, we see companies align it with benefit eligibility. So for example, in this example, this employee was full-time and then on 9/1 of 2020 became part-time. If maybe they switched in the middle of September. If their insurance ended right away, then it maybe makes sense to go back to the beginning of the month. If their insurance continued through the end of the month and then in October was the first month they really weren't eligible, maybe it makes sense to go forward. Again, there's not necessarily a right or wrong, but it's something that you'll need to decide internally for consistency. The other report that I'm going to show you is called the Code Review Report. And what this report does is it's going to highlight month by month the codes that are assigned to employees. There are essentially two types of codes on a 1095. One that shows whether the employee was offered coverage and one that shows whether the employee was actually covered. And this report lets you quickly highlight any potential issues. We've included a list in the handout of things that you probably should review. One thing I like to tell folks and have them keep mind of is none of these codes are bad or wrong necessarily, but you just need to think about which ones may or may not apply to your workforce. This slide has a couple of examples of things that we recommend most of our clients review because they're unusual. So for example, if you have an employee where you see a code 1F, that means that the insurance that they were offered does not meet federal minimum essential coverage standards. It's possible that their plan does not do that, but it's unlikely. So we don't expect to see that code particularly often. Similarly, something like a 1H paired with a 2C, what those mean are no coverage was offered, but they were enrolled. So again, an unusual combination, but maybe if you have an employee on severance who's not employed any longer, but their coverage was granted an extension of 6 months as part of their severance package, that may be accurate, but it's an unusual combination. A couple of other sort of unusual codes that we asked folks to look out for, 1B, 1C, and 1D means that the coverage that you offered for medical insurance was not offered to spouses or dependents of your employees. Again, that may be true in your particular scenario, but it's unusual. So if those codes pop up, you just want to take a look. And then we have some examples down here of common pairs of codes that we see. So as you're looking at that code review report, those are really some of the things that we sort of consider, typical and probably don't require a whole lot of other investigation. All right. Before I jump into the system, Sarah's going to talk a little bit about the process for completing the forms, and we'll show you that in the demo as well here.
So we tried to make this simple of what steps actually need to be completed and kind of break those out for you. You're not expected to memorize all this stuff. You will be getting an ACA year-end process guide that goes through each of the steps, where to find them in the system, along with some screenshots that will help you complete them in January when those forms kind of need to be populated. So the first step is going to be recalculating the ACA for all employees. One reason why you'd want to recalculate this is if a benefit profile is missing or an ACA profile is missing, it doesn't automatically update when you assign those. So you would need to recalculate it for the year to pull in any potential updates that had happened. Step 2 is we're going to add that tax year entry for the year that we are filing. And then once we have that entry added, we can populate and review and finalize those 1095-C forms. And then step 4, populate, review, and finalize the 1094-C form. And then step 5 is just notifying us that you have reviewed them, everything looks good, so then we can move on to that printing and filing.
Thanks.
And now we're going to actually look at those. System.
All right, let me share my KPay screen. All right, so, whoops. Okay, so we are going to walk through a couple of these reports that we talked about. So everything related to ACA is going to be on your team menu, HR, and there's an entire ACA section. There's a number of different things down here, but we're really going to focus on probably just 3 screens. From a reporting standpoint, everything that we're going to talk about is under ACA data details. These reports should also be in your MySafe reports. We have copied these out to all of our current ACA customers. If you are not seeing these reports, the compliance alert report or the code review report, definitely reach out to the payroll@bergenkdv.com address so that we can get those copied. You all should have these. So the first one I want to look at that I talked about is that compliance alert report. And so what this is going to do is it's going to show you any employee who has, the system has identified as potentially having a compliance issue. Sort of like the codes not ever being wrong, just because an employee is on here doesn't mean that there's something wrong with them that you have to fix necessarily. Sometimes it does. But it may just be that, the system is trying to alert you of potential issues. So on my sample, I have one person here. I've got Paul. And if I click the pencil icon on this report, it will take me into the timeline for this employee. And I can see the codes that he's going to have for each month. I can see a lot of information about him here. But what we're going to focus on is how to figure out why he's got a compliance alert and then make a decision about whether I need to do something. So you'll see there's this little yellow warning sign here for each month that there's an alert. If I click on that, it's going to open up this screen that admittedly looks a little intimidating. There's a lot of different things on here, and trying to sort it out, I think gives people pause sometimes. But I'm going to show you a couple really quick tips. Really what you're looking for is down here in the bottom third of this screen, there's going to be a section called Compliance Alert. And it is going to tell you specifically why this employee is on that report. So in this particular case, it says that the alert was thrown for the affordable plan. And so if I look through this panel and I find the section for the affordable plan right here, that message tells me there's no benefit profile assigned to this employee. So as I mentioned before, the benefit profile controls how the system figures out which plans the employee has to pick from so that it can find the lowest cost one to do this testing. So I know now that this person's on the compliance report because they didn't have a benefit profile, and now I can decide whether I need to correct anything. So again, like I say, for a lot of clients, they may just use blank rows on the benefit profile to indicate that the employee is not eligible for coverage. So if this employee is a part-time employee who should not have insurance, then the blank benefit profile row is absolutely accurate, and I don't need to do anything else. If this is an employee who should be eligible for insurance, then I'll want to add that benefit profile for him. Or if my setup has a benefit profile called not eligible, I'll want to add that. But again, this lets you know exactly what kind of issue you're having. And so you can figure out, what's going on really quickly. So that's what I really like about this compliance alert report and that detail. The other report I mentioned is called the code review report. And what this does is similar. It's going to give you a row for each employee for every month of the year. It's going to show you those codes for, here's line 14 and line 16 of what the system is going to populate on the form. And then it's also got notes that sort of explain what those codes mean. Because, even those of us who do this all the time, I only remember probably, half a dozen codes at best. And there's, I think, 24 to 30 codes. So some of those that don't come up as often, I don't necessarily remember what they're for. So this is great because it'll give you sort of a little brief summary of what it is. And then down at the bottom, these charts will let you filter for some of those unusual combinations that we gave you. So for example, the 1F that I talked about of, the non-affordable coverage, I can see, okay, I don't have any of those. I've got 121 A's and I've got 72 1H's, so no 1F's. I don't have to worry about that. I can look at my line 16 codes and see my distribution there. And then this chart, the 1416 cross-reference, lets you see how they combine together. So for example, if I wanted to see everybody who had 1A and 2G, the orange here, I can just click on the chart and it will drill down and show me just those specific employees and that have 1A and 2G, what those codes mean. And again, I can now make a decision and say, yep, I'm comfortable with that. Coverage was offered. They're under the federal poverty safe harbor. I don't need to do anything else. I'm good with that. So this report is great for looking at your codes at a high level and drilling down into specific employees who maybe have unusual combinations or things that you aren't sure of to make adjustments. Just like with the code review, the compliance alert report, if you discover that there's an issue, you can hit the pencil over here and it'll take you into that timeline view where you can update profiles, look at the compliance alert bucket, whatever you need to do there. So these are the two main reports that we really suggest you use. And we've customized them to make them as easy as possible for you. So if you don't have the compliance alert report, and you may have one that's slightly differently named, you might have one called quarterly compliance alert or monthly compliance alert, but they're the same. And the code review report, those are the ones that we really recommend. All right, I think I'm gonna keep driving, Sarah, as you talk about the year-end process.
Okay, so now we get to go through all those steps of you've looked at the data, looks good at this point. Now we kind of start doing the final steps to get it there. So we're gonna go to under this section still, the employee ACA actions. And what we're gonna do here is we're gonna select all of our employees. So click that little black box check mark. We're gonna select them all and we're gonna recalculate in the top right. That's gonna recalculate any profile changes, any of those items that we needed to do. If you have a larger number of employees, it may take a little bit. So I don't know if Micah, you want to click it and we sit there and watch it think for a second, because it's going to go through everybody and make sure everybody's recalculated to the most that the system can do.
Yeah, the other thing that Sarah and I talked about earlier is you'll notice it includes both active and terminated employees here. Terminated employees do still need a 1095 form potentially, but if you have a large number of terminated employees, if you have a lot of turnover, or if you've been a client for a long time, you may want to bring a column in here to get the termination dates and filter out people who were terminated years and years ago so that you aren't recalculating for people that didn't work at all this year.
Once we've recalculated, then we're going to go add that tax year. So we're going to go to the ACA year-end processing tab, and we're going to add that tax year. Now, 2022 isn't fully out there yet, so for this example, we're just going to use 2021, but it's the same steps. We're just going back a year so we can pull some data. And click Add. If you are a multi-EIN client, you'll need to potentially do this for each one of them when you get to the 1094. Because I think it pulls everybody in here, correct, Micah, for multi-EIN?
So yeah, you may have to do this more than once if you're a multi-EIN employer.
Then we're just going to click the pencil and drill into that year. Your screens might be slightly different because some of it is steps we do, some of it is steps that you do. But basically, you're just going to go to that first section and you're going to click that View Employee Forms 1095C. There's nothing here yet, so we need to mass add for the year. We're just going to do it all at once, pull everybody in who would need a form. And since we're already in that tax year, we can just add for the selected year. Once we've got some forms in here, we need to populate them and pull in that data that was calculating from their timelines. So we're going to click the black check box again to select them all. We're going to click Populate in the top right. This is going to pull in all that detail that the system was calculating. And now you can either, we do recommend that you review your forms. You can select them all and click View Selected,
Oh, there's a button. Ah!
or you can do them one by one. If you select them all, it lets you page through them in the top left up there. There's a little arrow button. Some key things to keep an eye out on your forms is these ones all have data for the 12 months, but if you had employees that switched potential codes throughout the month, they were hired mid-year, you may get a couple different line items there for the months. And you just want to make sure that if you have a code that they're kind of all populating, you also want to check the employee data that's populating in the top two. Right now, telephone numbers are not populating in there, so that would cause an issue for filing. So you'd want to make sure that phone numbers are populating as well. So it's just a double check to look through your forms, make sure they look correct.
This is the company phone number, right? Yeah.
Yep, the company phone number, sorry. You can finalize as you go, or if you looked at your employees, they all look good, you can mass finalize if you hit the back arrow and select all, click the three little dots, and then click finalize. And that completes step 3. So now you have those all ready for your employees. And since we're in year end, you can click where Micah's hovering over the forms, or if you go back a screen, there's a 1094 section as well. Yep, so you just click the viewed form 1094C, we're gonna do that one next. And you click add new. You're gonna populate the form. And these questions are really determined by your company. That first box is always checked. This is the authoritative transmittal for this ALE member. That's because we're going to be filing on behalf of for you. But these other questions are dependent on your company. And we see a lot of potential errors here if you don't answer them completely. There's some yes, no questions. If you have questions on what these options mean, we do recommend you go back to your broker, your insurance company, and answer them the best to your ability. If you just want to click OK or just throw something in there, Micah, you can. And then it's going to pull in that data that's in the system. You're going to want to double check. Some of the main things is to check that contact name and phone number that populates for your company. It's going to populate down below the total 1095Cs that were created, those answers the questions you answered during the population will be there. Another area to check if you are a multi-EIN or part of an ALE group is Part 4 in particular, to make sure that those other ALE members' information has populated on the form. Once it...
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, this is especially important if you are a multi-EIN employer or part of an ALE and not all of the companies process payroll with Bergen KDV. If they are all inside the system, this should populate automatically. But if you are part of an ALE and you're the only part that's populating your 1094s this way, you will need to add them.
Thank you for just adding to that. Once the form is done, it's the same thing. You just click finalize form. And you would need to do this if you have multiple EIN, potentially do it for each one. And then let us know when you're done by emailing payroll@Bergen KDV. And that's basically it. So it may look scary. It's not that much. The main thing is just if you have questions on your codes, go back to your broker insurance company. If you have questions on why the system is populating something or questions about the system configuration, reach out to us. That's what we're here for, to help with the system of why something is showing the way it is. If anything's missing, we can help kind of direct that as well. in regards to some additional details that are coming out, so you'll get that year-end processing guide that goes through all these steps, what to click, how to, or when to click on them. It also has some common errors that we have seen with forms and filing as well. And then that additional resources slide is going to be included as well on the handout, but download documentation also has some areas of things that we've collected throughout the years too, and completed.
One thing I should show, since I noticed here on our sample, the contact information is blank. If you do need to make an update to the contact information, and this is outlined in the handout as well, but that's going to be under admin, global setup, and company setup. You probably have a tab called HR, or you may have a tab called ACA, and there'll be a, excuse me while I bring in the slide that you can't see. You'll have a section for ACA settings. And in here is where you're going to put that company contact name and phone number that will populate into the form. So if you see that on the form that it's someone who's no longer there, it's a global setup, company setup. This is where you're going to update that for your next year's filing. All right. So we have, at this point, we have looked at some reports. We've talked about some audit processes. We've walked through the process. It is just 5 little steps, which hopefully seem not quite so scary now that Sarah's walked us through it. Let's open it up to some questions, Bethany.
Yeah, it looks like I've only had one come through here so far. So if anyone else has any questions, feel free to throw those into the chat here quick. The question that we got, this particular example has over 1,700 employees. So they're wondering if it's possible to upload a spreadsheet for staff in line 14 and 16.
So if you are already set up with the ACA module inside of KPay, it will calculate for the entire year. So you shouldn't have to upload anything. But yes, if you discover that you know, the values populated on the 1094, 1095 month to month are not correct, ideally we would want to look at the ACA profile in the system and understand why it's not coming up with the right values so that we can have the system do the math going forward. But we can import the values. So if you aren't comfortable with the way the system has come up with it, you can certainly load the line 14 and 16 values into Pay.
Micah, can you unfinalize that form for me? Just another thing that you can do. You can manually update some information on here as well if you needed to. Again, like Micah said, though, if it's something that the code doesn't look right or something's not populating, we'd want to look at the profile to see if we can have the system do it for you. But if you did need to change a code or something, there is the option to manually update it. Click save, don't forget to save it. But that is an option as well.
That's a good point, yeah, for one-off changes. If it's not worth importing the whole thing, you can, yeah, just edit. So.
Yeah, so if you just have one employee, that looks a little weird. If you wanted to, you could do this.
Awesome, thank you. The next question, how do you see what dependents are showing?
So once you've populated the 1095, they'll actually show down here in part 3. Again, they will only show up though if you are a self-insured employer. So if you are using KPay for insurance enrollments, but you are not self-insured, the system will not populate these even if they exist in the system. It will only populate them for self-insured companies. If you are a self-insured employer and you don't see the dependents here, that is likely a setup issue on your benefit plan, because we have to tell the system that this plan is self-insured. So contact support about that one, because it's a quick update for us. But once you populate the 1095s, you can see all the dependents here in part 3.
And just to add to that real quick, there's that little checkbox there that shows if you're self-employed. If you're not self-employed and that's checked, like just keep an eye out on that. If you are self-insured and there is dependent, they do need to have a date of birth and social security number there. So check for those as well to make sure that that information is populating.
Great, thank you. The next one here, just as a reminder, a couple people had asked, if we have questions as we're going through this process later on, what do we do? You can reach out to payroll@bergenkdv.com. If it's something specific from this webinar or something, Sarah and Micah are happy to help as well. But that payroll email will be the best spot to go to afterwards.
Yeah, that or I never remember the phone number. Do you know the phone number, Sarah? It's the normal payroll support email and phone number. They all come through the same place. So wherever you would call or email for support, it all gets to us eventually.
Awesome. The next question here, what if we don't have that ACA info already input for current employees? Can we manually enter and then update to get on track for next year?
We probably want to look at your specific setup. So if you have the ACA module set up, but the information isn't populating, then, I think similar to the question before, we'd want to look at the profiles to understand why the information isn't pulling. If you are not currently using the ACA module inside of the platform and want to try to use it yet for this year, it sort of depends on if you've been on the platform all year. We may still be able to retroactively figure out the details because we'll have your payroll history. And if you are using the benefit enrollment side in KPay, we'll have the benefit enrollments. If you aren't using the benefit side of KPay, then yeah, we would probably need to look at an import or look at setting up the platform to start up in January and move forward. But I would say reach out to us specifically so we can look at what you've got going on your specific account, and we can make some recommendations about what to do.
Awesome, thank you. The next one here, can you run a report that shows what dependents are enrolled prior to the 1095 form?
Oh, sure. Yeah, there is a report under benefits, under team benefits. It's just called dependents. And what you're going to want to do is filter this because by default, it's going to show you, all dependents on all plans, even if they're beneficiaries or emergency contacts or anything like that. So you're going to want to take this and filter it out for probably benefit type. Most of you are going to have medical. Again, there may be some slight variations on your particular setup. But if you filter it by benefit type, and then if you end up with anyone over here where it says beneficiary or something instead, you should take those out. But then this will show you the dependent name, their relationship. I think the default report doesn't have birth date on it, but you can go ahead and add columns for, if you search for dependent, you can put in dependent birthday, you can pull in dependent social security number, those things that are supposed to be on the report. So it should be pretty easy to pull it together using this benefits and dependent report.
Great, thank you. The next one here, after the submission of the 1094 and 1095, what information is provided by Bergen KDV to the employer when the return is, quote, accepted with errors?
That's somebody who's been through the process before. So when the return goes to the IRS, it falls into a couple of different statuses. The best is accepted. We like that the best. And the one that we like the least is rejected because then they can't even load it. In the middle is accepted with errors. And what will happen in that case is when we send the file to the IRS, they will return a file to us with specific errors on it. We will give you those error messages to review. A lot of times, they aren't even things that you need to fix necessarily. So the most common accepted with errors issue that we run into is either on an employee or a dependent where their name and social security number don't match the IRS records. However, you don't necessarily have to fix it to refile. Unlike those of you on the payroll side who are used to the social security mismatch letters, this is a lot less robust of a process. The IRS simply asks that you make an outreach to the employee to confirm that the information is correct. If they give you a different number or a new number, then you would update KPay and we can resubmit. If they say no, what you have in the system is correct, then that's really the end of the process. You're just going to want to keep all that documentation that you've confirmed that that's the correct number with the employee for them or for their dependent. We do occasionally end up with other errors like, if a dependent is missing a birth date or missing a social security number, that may fall into the accepted with errors category. But we will return all of the specific errors back to you to review and update as appropriate when we get the feedback from the IRS.
Great, thank you for that. And the last one here that I see, unless anyone has any others they'd like to submit, if we are an ALE and the other entity has a different EIN, do you say that we need to add their EE numbers to our EE numbers in Part 4?
No, you don't need to add their counts in, but you do need to add their name and employer and federal ID numbers. So like as we look at the form, we'll just go look at it here quick. So in this section in the counts, this is just for you as an individual member of the ALE. So this is just your company. Section 4 here, we just need the name and the EIN of any of your associated entities.
Great, thank you. It doesn't look like there are any other questions that have come in here, but again, just for a refresher, if there's any questions that you have as you're going through the ACA process, or even as you're kind of assessing before you get in there, feel free to reach out to payroll@bergenkdv.com. They're happy to help out. Micah or Sarah, anything you'd like to say in closing?
No, I think just that, ACA is one of those processes that I think intimidates a lot of folks just because you only do it once a year and there's all these codes that mean things. But, we're here to help. So, as you're working through the process, we've got some really great instructions in the year-end packet, in the checklist, and just let us know as you work through it and we'll get it figured out.
Awesome,
Just
thanks so much.
ditto to what Micah said.
Awesome, thank you so much and have a great rest of your day, everyone.
All right, thanks all.
Thank you.